Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
That was good the first time. Glad everybody came ready to go tonight. First item on the agenda, which Ms. Edge pointed out to me, was for myself to call our board of commissioners back in session, and I'll do that at this time.
Thank you, and I'd like to call to order the Nash-Rocky Mountain Public Schools Board of Education as we go into this Nash County Board of Commissioners current expense and capital outlay joint board meeting. And since several people will be leaving to go to the Boys and Girls Banquet, we figured they didn't want to eat their chicken right now. They're going to wait so they can have their burger with the boys and girls, and we thank you for adjusting your time to do so. So Commissioner Davis and I decided, well, let's go on but continue to eat and enjoy your meal. At this time, we're going to address the business items as listed on your agenda. Are there any other items or suggestions to go on this agenda? And we accept the agenda as presented.
Will you be okay to, at the end, just ask if there's any more items at that point in time? I know it's nothing right this
Right.
minute. Okay, thank you, ma'am.
So we'll add 8 additional items. We will accept the agenda as presented with the addition of number 8 additional items. All those in favor, make known by the usual sign of aye. Aye. Those opposed, ayes have it. We will now proceed. Dr. Jeffries.
Good evening, Board of Education. Good evening, Commissioners. Thank you for this opportunity once again to present before both bodies. Item number 1 is the Williford update. You have a handout, which I'm referencing at this time. It's a reminder, the criteria used to identify the schools for consideration in the Innovative School District are school performance scores in the lowest 5%. If the school includes all or part of grades K through 5, if the school did not exceed growth in at least one of the 3 prior years of measure, and the school did not adopt one of the established reform models. At this point in time, the ISD professionals are currently engaged in the task of selecting schools for inclusion in the 2021 academic year. They have the maximum of 5 schools that may be selected in this round. In the upcoming weeks, the ISD superintendent, and they have a newly appointed superintendent, Ms. Letisa Allen, will be working with local district superintendents and boards for each qualifying schools. Among those 6, Nash-Rocky Mountain was one of the first visited. At that time, it was a 90-minute presentation by our principal, Dr. Alston. Present were the board chair, Mrs. Edge, myself. Dr. Alston was the facilitator. Dr. Hall, who supervises the new ISD superintendent, Ms. Allen. The next step in the process, they will complete their evaluation activities. Among them is a comprehensive needs assessment. Williford was able to forego that process because we had a comprehensive needs assessment conducted last year. It's still valid. So we have completed those first rounds of the evaluation process. Once the selection process is completed, the recommendations will be finalized and they will identify a match of a qualified, innovative school operator. Those are typically folks who've operated in the charter realm and have a success record. The contract that will be recommended to the board will be one for 5 years. The timeline, at the November state board meeting, will be the recommendation for those schools that are going to be considered for inclusion in the ISD. The final approval will be at the January 2019 board meeting. At that time, the contract for the provider will be approved. So right now, we are waiting for the November State Board meeting to hear the final recommendation of the schools that will be examined for inclusion this year. I'll take any questions.
I guess, Dr. Jefferson, I'd have to ask, and I realize the press is here, and I'm somewhat reluctant to ask, but do you and your board feel pretty good at this time that we're gonna be okay in November? For some reason, read something that makes me think we're gonna be okay.
I just want to preface any comments with, we do not control the process. The Board of Education is very much in a reactionary posture. It's a matter of record in both my board's open meetings and a previous smaller joint committee meeting that we felt very positive and got great feedback from our initial meeting. We're encouraged, and I do believe it's a matter of record from the spokesperson for the ISD that Williford has been removed from consideration at this point. But until the legislative timelines have been met, we'll reserve any further comment, but I feel very good about our position.
I guess I'd just like to hear you say the word removed. Thank you, sir.
But I will say, Madam Chair, if I might, that I saw Mr. Hall yesterday in a meeting, and he was very complimentary of the things that we are doing at Williford School.
So your answer is we feel real positive. That makes you feel a little better.
Well, I felt good,
Yes.
like Dr. Jefferson said after our committee meeting the other day.
Yes.
But I guess I like to feel good every day.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sir.
We'll now move to Mr.
That response that I saw in local newspaper saying that will not be included was premature.
No, sir. In what was quoted in the local paper was a direct response from the spokesperson from the ISD. What we've reserved
Did they
is
tell you all that?
we've received informal notification that we will defer from mentioning, but they've been very public in responding to a media request that we've been removed from that point in the process. And if you look at the next steps, you can kind of read the tea leaves. There's increased activity in the communities among those schools that have been or are being considered for that November meeting recommendation. And we've had no such activity.
Any further
Madam
questions?
Chair, if I could, please. I just want to say also, Commissioner Davis, that the board has been very diligent in their response and how they're responding to that Williford School and all the things that have been engaged in that process. And we are very excited about what's going to happen and what it's doing for the entire community. So I think as the folks from Raleigh came down to see, they saw the enthusiasm of the board, they saw the enthusiasm of the administration, and also the enthusiasm of the neighborhood. So we feel really good about what's going on and how this district itself is handling that situation to take us to the next level.
And along those same lines, on behalf of the Board of Education, I'd like to offer our sincere appreciation to the commissioners. You've been supportive from the very initiation of this process, and we feel that your public support has gone a long way to helping us in this process. We thank you for that. If there are no further questions, we'll transition to the surplus properties item. Mr. Miller?
Good evening.
Good evening, sir.
So just to make sure in terms of the question in regards to the surplus properties, is that those funds put into the capital outlay account? And I guess there's a question for the superintendent in using those particular funds. So yes, those funds, we had the sale of Spalding facility. Those funds were deposited into our asset capital outlay account. As of the end of the fiscal year, June 30th, 2018, those funds do roll over into our general fund balance account at that time.
And the essence of the question could those funds be utilized to support the shortfall created by the legislature's decision to rescind the previously approved $200,000 for operations at City High? The answer is a little bit nuanced. The short answer is yes, they could be used. But what we have to confront is how prudent is it to plan on those one-time funds as it relates to recurring operations. If we dug into it a little bit deeply, as it relates to the funds acquired from the Spalding sale, we had to do some backfilling because Mr. Davis, in his leadership, we were able to engage in some of the projects and getting the facilities upgraded and ready for to receive and house that program. We had to return those funds that were expended. And then when you think about the ongoing operations, City High School is in operations now. So to wait on OR Pope's bid to close and for that process to be finalized is not a realistic option for us at this point in time.
Mary Sutton.
Any questions or comments?
Did that answer?
I think so.
Okay.
It was more a general question of what happens to funds when we sell asset properties.
Yes, sir. By law, they have to go back into capital, and then at the end of the fiscal, they'll roll into the fund line.
But they can still be used on capital.
Yes, sir.
Fund
Yes, sir.
I don't think any of us do. We just really want to do that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, Rick. Mobile units, Mr. Davis.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I think the last update I gave was 2017, I think we briefly mentioned in one of the last meetings. We had 21 mobile units on our sites with a total yearly expenditure of $159,606.36. That includes utilities, insurance, and leasing of the buildings. As of today, we have 16 buildings, totaling $130,547.20, and that does include all leasing fees, utilities, and the insurances to operate those buildings. I think the other question was where are these buildings located? We have one at Benvenue Elementary School, two at Cedar Grove Elementary School, two at Nash Central High School, 4 at Nash Community College, housing the early college students, 2 at Red Oak Middle, 3 at Southern Nash High, 2 additional on that campus that are serving the data center and the regional Spalding Center that when we closed Spalding, relocated those programs. Of those 16 buildings, 12 of these are leased, and 4 of these buildings we own. 2 of those are at Nash Central High, serving the ROTC program. 1 is a bathroom unit. The other 2 are the data center and the Spalding Resource Center at Southern Nash High School. Once the building is completed, Building C renovation, those buildings will be turned back in. All 4 of these buildings are leased from the early college. That'll be an additional savings of roughly $29,447. Any other questions?
The only thing is I mentioned to the manager, did we make a request for school utilization versus capacity?
Yeah.
Okay, so when do we think we would be getting that?
We have it this evening.
Okay, thank you.
That it? Thank you.
Transportation inquiry, Mr. Miller.
I just want to make sure everyone has a copy. So what you have in front of you, there was a request for the travel times, for the earliest travel times for each school. You have 3 sheets in front of you. First sheet would be the elementary, middle school is the second sheet, and the third sheet is the high school level. What we have on this sheet just gives you an idea of the pickup times for the earliest student at each of these elementary schools, and then the drop-off time, the latest time for each of the elementary, middle, and high school as well. So if we take a look at the first sheet dealing with elementary, I've highlighted the earliest pickup time for a student is at Middlesex Elementary School at 6:22 in the morning. Their ride time is 81 minutes. The ride distance is 41.48 miles. That includes the entire route of picking up other students on that route on the way to school. It is not their time from their home to school, but that is the entire route where they're picking up all other students, and they arrive at school at 7:46. The actual bell time for all elementary schools is 8:15. And each sheet, middle school, high school, also has the same information listed with regards to pickup times, drop-off times as well. Obviously, there's some nuances when you think of McKinney-Vento students who are homeless and have to travel from one end of the county to the other, which makes their ride time a little more as well, and drop-off time a little longer as well.
Mr. Miller, embedded in this data, as you referenced McKinney-Vento, may also be those students who've developed temporary housing outside of the county.
Absolutely.
And we still have the federal obligation of transporting. That's recognized in these routes as well, correct?
Yes, sir.
Certainly. If a student qualifies in their family based upon need and the federal criteria as McKinney-Vento, homeless, they sometimes establish temporary housing outside of the county, but because they started in one of our schools, they are still eligible to stay at that school, and the district owns the responsibility of transporting them to their new residence and the school that they have previously been enrolled.
No limitations to that.
With no limitations.
Is that happen often? That sounds pretty bizarre.
When you say often, once is too often. Once is often, but we have a cohort by which and I want to remind both bodies that these are the most fragile students and families, and any opportunity we can afford them to ensure consistency is something that we're definitely obligated to do. But it is not uncommon.
Do you pick those kids up as a part of a regular bus route?
Mr. Miller,
sorry?
are those students embedded as a part of a regular run?
Yes, it is part of a run. We have to include them in the run, so we try to figure out the best route to pick up other students on the way to that particular site. So yes.
I just wondered because in running back and forth to Raleigh from time to time, I'll see a transportation vehicle, a school transportation vehicle. It might be an expedition or an SUV. And do we have any option to do something like that rather than a complete bus route having to go?
We can check into that. I think they have.
We don't utilize
I would
the vehicles he described to transport students. We're insured and authorized to use our state authorized equipment. So it would be one of our regular yellow buses.
So would that be an individual could be in, you said there are no limitations?
There are no
Does that mean
limitations.
Does that mean a child could go to Wake County and we'd have to pick them up?
Yes, sir. If that family is desirous of that child staying in their school that they've established attendance, we have an obligation to do that.
You would pick that person up in Wake County as a part of a regular bus route?
Yes, sir.
And I think with that said, the transportation would strategically look for that best route and maybe going out to that route first and working their way back in.
Yes.
Thank you.
And that example is as well on the second page when you look at the middle school. Edwards Middle School, which is highlighted. The pickup time is 5:48 a.m. in the morning. That student is a EC student, lives out in the Middlesex area, but the school is Edwards Middle School. So they're picked up in Middlesex, which is why their travel time is obviously quite long as well. But based on the requirements, that's something we have to do as well.
Well, I'm not an educator, and I certainly don't do bus routes, but it just seems to me that you would be better served to have a vehicle insured that you could go pick up and transport these kids, rather than a bus load of the kids. The liability there seems to be great if you had to go to somewhere like Wake County or some far distance, plus the time away from the school to make that transport is getting into their time for, the educational day.
It is.
Just my thinking.
Mr. Dahl?
The federal guidelines changed many years ago. One of the things we used to do in athletics in our system, when I was county athletic director, we were able to transport kids in vans. Like a tennis team where only 4 or 5 kids, we put them in a van and we roll them out. Federal guidelines changed to the point where we can't transport anybody unless they're on an activity bus, which is regular school bus or an activity bus that is a regular school bus. The short buses could be used in a situation like that, but we don't have the luxury to be able to take a van and run it into Harnett County because we got a kid that needs to be at the southern end of our county. We have to run a bus.
The vehicles I see, like in Wake County, school transportation, what are they for? Do you have any idea?
I have no idea.
I'm gonna find out, and I'll let you know.
I know as far as athletics is concerned, we have to use a regular activity bus.
Well, it may be special needs, but my point is, this is a special need. It would appear to me, rather than taking a bus, what is your typical load on the bus? How many kids? 25, 30, 40?
The bus, we have buses that can fit up to 60 kids on a bus.
60?
Yes.
So you could conceivably take 59 kids for one and go to Wake County. That's what I'm hearing.
If that's what it calls for.
Gotta be a better way.
Ms. Chavis?
I have a question. I know we're throwing out hypotheticals, but what areas are we actually picking up kids from that are in this situation? Is it really Wake County, or what are some of the areas?
Offhand, I don't know, but we have
We would
plenty.
have to get that information with the
Absolutely.
specifics. And I have to caution, when you're talking about McKinney-Vento as a classification, it's a protected class. So any stigma or separation of that class is not viewed favorably by the federal government. So the exercise, as we're talking about a hypothetical, an initiative specifically for those students that differentiates them from their peers is something that we would have to tread very lightly around.
What you do is you take, instead of differentiating one from their peers, you take up to 60 and you differentiate them from their peers in the school. I mean, that's 60 times versus one.
This challenge is not unique to Nash-Rocky Mountain Public Schools. There are districts all over the nation confronting this exact same challenge. In municipalities where there are more options, such as a Wake or a Charlotte-Mecklenburg, there are vendors that you can sometimes contract with for exceptionalities. But the first order of business is receiving consent from the parent of that child. So this is not unique to Nash-Rocky Mountain.
Any other questions?
Yeah, how many buses do we have that we are running on a daily basis?
You would ask me one question I
Could I
don't
just-
know offhand. I can get you that information exactly, because that's part of our efficiency, and we could get you that information.
Do we have a full complement of bus drivers? Or are we in a situation pretty frequently where we're having to double routes? And is that affecting pickup and,
We are running a 3-tiered system right now. So the high schools obviously start first, and they're picking up elementary afterwards. So we are running a 3-tier system because throughout the state, bus drivers are in need for every district throughout the state. So we do need drivers, absolutely.
Let him finish. You finished? All right.
If I may, could we get those questions forward to yourself, and you can send that information forward to Commissioner, to the
Do you have
commissioners?
anybody here taking notes?
We're taking notes.
I would hope they're taking the notes from this meeting. All I want to know is, how many buses are you running to support your students? And, at this point in time, how many drivers are you short, and what you typically average as being short?
Absolutely, we'll get that for you.
Mr. Wayne? Mr.
One of
Dahl?
the things that I want to point out to both of these boards, our school system traditionally over the years has to be rated for transportation on efficiency. Efficiency of operation, that helps us because it helps us with the dollar flows and dollar cents from the state. And consistently over the years, and I've been in the school system a long time, we are at the top end of efficiency. So I rest assured, county commissioners, that we are doing due diligence in making sure that our kids are transported daily in the most efficient manner. There's no reason for us not to do it that way because we would lose dollars, right, Dr. Jeffrey, if we did?
That's entirely accurate. The routing is completed by software that's endorsed and approved by the state. The days of drawing routes in the dirt are long gone. All of the routes have to be, they go through tiers of vetting by the state, and our funding is approved and endorsed based upon that. So yes, it is probably the most scrutinized as it relates to efficiency and funding.
Commissioner Davis?
I'm aware of what you just said, Mr. Dole, that we do a great job on efficiency of bus routes. But I read it every year how well we do, and I know that affects the funding. And I'm not smart enough to know this, Mr. Miller, and you may have to answer this question later, but does that strive to get efficiency drive up these bus times sometime?
Does it drive the bus times?
Yes, sir. Does that, the fact that we are trying to do it in the most efficient way, which means the least number of buses, et cetera, most kids on a bus that we can put on a bus, does that in itself make these ride times longer sometimes?
Potentially, it could, obviously, with the number of buses we get from the state. Obviously, we only have a certain number of buses to transport these 15,000 students. So we do have issues where we're doubling, tripling the actual route, doubling, tripling students.
And it's an excellent question, because in making that consideration, if we add buses where we had capacity on existing routes to serve those students, we take a negative hit in efficiency.
Well,
So
that's what I was
excellent.
thinking.
Yes, excellent,
Just
excellent question.
the way you have to do it, I think, is what I think it will affect.
Yes, sir.
You say 15,000 students. How many students do we have that utilize a bus? And you can get back to that to us later too. I would think that would be considerably
Bus
less.
ridership has increased, but obviously that changes daily, but we can get that.
I understand, just on the average for last year, how many students were actually utilizing a bus? Because you also spend the money all the time on stacking lanes, which means a lot of them are not riding the bus.
The day of having enough bus drivers ended when the federal law changed the age of the bus driver.
Yeah.
When we no longer could have any driver under 18 years old, that's when we could not have enough bus drivers. And as far as I know, we've been short every year.
I understand that's a problem everywhere.
Yep.
We used to mandate if you wanted to work as a teacher assistant in our school system, or you wanted to work in the cafeteria in our school system, it was imperative that you drive a school bus. What hurt us is when the labor laws changed or were enforced, the fact that if they make over 40 hours, then they have to be paid time and a half. So you couldn't be a bus driver and a custodian. You couldn't, because there's too many hours there and it would be unaffordable. So in those days, the teacher assistants, I know, they drove school buses where they wouldn't get a job. But now we can't do that. We can't do that. So it makes it more necessary. We train bus drivers and they get their bus training. We spend all that money to train them. They would drive for a week and get another job. I mean, that's how fast they turn over. It's absolutely unbelievable.
back to the same old problem of overregulated.
Yes, that's a good word. Any more questions on transportation? Staffing versus funding.
And Madam Chair, it may help us to just share where the district is at this point in time. In reconciling our budget for the 2018-2019 academic year, staff has recommended a reduction in force. The board, in their wisdom, have offered to table that item until we get on the other side of our financial audit. That audit is being closed out by Anderson, Smith, and White, at which point in time it will be revisited by the Board of Ed Finance Committee and then added to the agenda for a future board meeting. So we can answer, I guess, specific questions, but that item has been tabled by the board.
Is there a date that audit is expected, and is it really expected to be any different than what you got? I mean, normally the audit is just verifying what you got. In our world, I don't know about school.
Yeah, it's a little different for us. These CPAs reconcile it with the business rules and then tell us an exact figure for fund balance and our closing of the book. So theirs is an exact process, whereas, and it's post-mortem. When we are projecting a budget, it's our projections for the year, and you know, on the day that we project it, it changes because eventualities happen. Projects that we didn't know we were going to have to address pop up. So it looks a little bit different, but when you have the CPAs come in and finalize and clean up with the business rules, we know exactly what those figures are.
Does history show you, Dr. Jeffers, that there's much difference in the numbers at any given time?
We've had some fluctuation. I can only speak from my tenure in the 3 years, where as it relates to appropriations from fund balance, as well as changes that we anticipate in child nutrition, where there was a change where we had to reconcile payments for health that we hadn't had before. So with legislative changes, we have to make adjustments. So it is different. And we've seen a good bit of variance over the 3 years that I've been here.
So apparently at this point in time, and I'm just trying to understand it, the world that y'all have to operate in, so I can be more accepting of where we're at. But here we are in month 3, I guess, of this school year, or approaching month 3. And we now know that we've got a $1.4 million shortfall in personnel salaries or somewhere. And that's where you got to go to, because that's where most of your money is, I understand.
Yes, sir, 80%.
80%, yeah. It seems like, what puts you in a position where you know that now that you didn't know that at the beginning of the year?
Well, as you're aware, enrollment fluctuates. The 3 funding sources for the district are federal, state, and local. They don't operate on the same calendar. We've been fortunate that the state was better than they had been in the previous years. But in reconciling the federal dollars, the changes in regulations and the rules governing the restrictions on those funds change on an ongoing basis. They don't stop making the changes at the start of the academic year. So as we get or lose flexibility with how we can utilize those funds, we're able to make operational decisions and then reconcile where we have a shortfall. I'll give you a more tangible example. We were able to, with loosening of restrictions on how we utilize federal dollars, we were able to shift some central office personnel on the federal dollars instead of using local to accommodate for those salaries. We didn't have a definitive answer on that until late September, when they reconciled the rules and had the presentation for the federal directors at the state level. Those are the types of changes that we have to get guidance on before we can finalize how we're going to utilize and expend those funds
Is that every year?
every year.
Mr. Bell?
Belleville?
The committee recommended cutting staff. Was it just one reason, the shortfall, money? Was that their sole reason for cutting, for recommending?
The sole reason was to reconcile the balanced budget, and we have a choice of either cutting expenditures or a reduction in force. That's by law, the options that that the Board of Ed can consider. And that was our sole purpose. That was the recommendation to the board.
You didn't have no other options?
This is still in process right now, so there are always other options. But the recommendation we presented before the board was a reduction in force.
Well, it seemed like to me if there are other options and those staff members are really needed to move your academic program along, that certainly hope that you be looking at other options that you can maintain the staff if they are needed. If they're not needed, they shouldn't have been there in the first place.
The Board of Education has been explicit in that directive, Mr. Commissioner. That is exactly what they've tasked staff to do.
Comments?
I don't know what to say. It seems to me that, you're kind of in a hole, about a
Can't hear you.
1.4 million.
They can't hear you.
I say you're at a point now to where you've got like a 1.4 million shortfall, if that's what it is. And, what are you doing right now to address the shortfall, or are you just waiting till you have the audit to decide how you're gonna go, or what?
That is what the Board of Education is tasked. That when tabling this item, we wanted to wait until the CPAs reconcile our audit, and then it'll be re-agendized at the Financial Committee, and then it'll go on the agenda of the Board of Ed.
I just like to reiterate what Dr. Jeffries just said. I chair that finance committee, and we diligently look for ways, and like I shared with our board, as well as the commissioner board, this is not a surprise to any of us. We've had these meetings over and over, and we've shared what the outcome would be if we didn't do anything. When we stay flat in areas and no income's coming in other than what we've got, and I do tip my hat to the administration. They did a due diligence job as far as looking for grants and fundings to help us to succumb to some of the shortfalls that we do have. When we saw that, we knew it was coming. We made a prudent decision to hold off on these salary or the reductions until after the audit. Once the audit's complete, we'll do a more thorough investigation where we'll know exactly where we are.
Mr. Mayor?
You said 80% of your budget's salaries. Am I correct that unfilled positions, you don't get that money at all from the state? If you have a lapsed salary, does that money come in, or does it never leave Raleigh?
There are restrictions to lapsed salaries, and those laws have, the regulations and guidance have changed. But we'll get that information to you, exactly what flexibility we have with lapsed salaries.
I would think yours are more restricted.
They're very restricted.
If we didn't have lap salaries, we would have a $1.4 million shortfall plus.
Comments?
Just one pointed question. And again, I'm not in the business of trying to be an educator. But if I look at this from a county commissioner perspective, if we had that situation, I got to believe that our board would be doing everything possible immediately to try to affect that shortfall. So what I'm hearing you saying is that there's really nothing that you can do immediately to affect that 1 million shortfall.
What you hear me saying is the board to which I am a servant, has instructed me to stand down until we get on the other side of our audit, at which point in time we'll take the recommendations back to the Finance Committee, who will then make a recommendation for the full board's consideration.
Ms. Bull?
In listening to the discussion and questions, and that question that Mr. Outlaw just raised, we have an option, which is not, in my perspective, a good option, and that option would be, we know right now, looking at our books, that we have a $1.4 million shortfall. That's a given. What we could do, which I definitely am not in favor of, is to start now riffing people before we actually get the final figures from our audit. I think it is to the benefit of our employees that we wait to have all of the information that we can possibly get before we make such a drastic final decision. So waiting for the audit may seem to some people a waste of time, but to me, that is a way that we are trying to preserve jobs. And I am definitely supportive of not doing anything right now until we actually get the auditor's report. This is not the first year or the first time that we've had to have this difficult discussion. We've had to have discussions about riffing people several times since I've been on the school board. And we always looked at all of the factors before we made a final decision. And I commend this board for having the guts to put a stop to it until we actually get all of the information. The only other thing is that we have some gracious board or person donate, grant, give, transfer, whatever, that $1.4 million in our accounts so that we don't have to discuss this ugly subject of ripping people. But that's not our reality. Our reality is, bottom line, we are $1.4 million short. So the question is, what are we going to do about it? Short of somebody giving us that money, we have to look at what we can do in order to balance our budget. We've got to. That's state law. So that's where we are, and that's the reality of the day.
Well, let me ask this question. You've got, or you had, I don't know if you still do, but do you have principal mentors that you are funding? And if you have principal mentors that you are funding at over $50,000, is that something that in these times you should consider a change? And are there other ways to make sure that our principals fully understand their responsibilities other than having 4 or 5 mentors that go wherever they go to assist these principals? I would think we've got pretty good principals since we've got, at the supplement rate that we pay our principals, they should be pretty skilled people.
I would hope that we as a board of education would be given the authority and given the right that we already have, given the right to exercise our judgment in hiring and dispersing our human resources, i.e. our people, so that we can best serve our children. Now, if we've got a brand-new principal, then I don't even know, if you've got information that we've got all these mentors running around, that's news to me. I don't know that. But even if that were true, if we have 3 new principals, somebody has got to help those principals learn how to best serve our children. And so to say to Dr. Jeffries or this board that we ought not have those people in position, I think is assuming that we are misallocating. And I do not agree that that is what is happening. I think this discussion really is a discussion that we need to table until we as a board, the Nash-Rocky Mountain Schools Board of Education, feel that we've got the information that we need in order to make the best decision based on the finances that we have at hand.
Well, let me just make a couple of comments and you can table it. I thought the purpose for these meetings was to discuss funding. This is a discussion on funding, and I'm sorry if you feel offended that I would ask a question regarding funding. I have no authority on who you fund, how you fund. And if you will go look in your budget, I believe I would be correct in saying that you are funding 5 principal mentors at $54,000. Now, I didn't make that up. I saw that in the budget. It may be gone now. But my point is this. All I'm saying is that if there are ways that you can affect this 1.4 million, at least from my perspective sitting on this board that I sit on, then I would be doing what I could do to try to impact that rather than letting that mountain continue to climb. So that's just my opinion. My opinion means nothing, that and a cup of coffee, a dime won't get you. Thank you. And I'll try not to be so pointed in my questions if you guys don't want to hear it.
Please don't misunderstand me, Mr. Outlaw.
I would hope, well, maybe I did misunderstand you, but I would hope that if we're ever going to trust and have confidence in each other as two boards, that we've got to sit here and we've got to be comfortable to ask tough questions. And if we offend you, then I apologize for offending you. We all want to work together. We want the funding to be good for the school. We want our kids to be the best they can be. But I'm not just going to sit here and not ask questions that I think are pertinent to the discussion. That's just me.
I'm sorry you're offended, and I certainly am not offended. But I think this is something that this board, my board, has decided to weigh upon, and all I'm doing is I'm asking that you give us that right.
I don't have any authority to give you anything.
Thank you.
That is your decision.
Thank you.
I'm just sitting here as a member of the Nash County Board of Commissioners, trying to work with you and ask questions that might help alleviate the situation we've got. If they don't, then they don't. They're not intended to offend.
Did you want to say something?
I don't want to belabor the point, but I feel compelled to just reference that when you're talking about human resource development and leadership development, that there are volumes of research that support a novice professional who's responsible for supervising a multi-million-dollar physical plant, salaries and operations in excess of several $1 million, and more importantly, impacting the lives of hundreds of students, that an investment of someone to shepherd them through the learning process that all leaders, all good leaders go through, it's a prudent investment. And that's something that I will continue to recommend to my board, because ultimately they too need coaching, professional development, and opportunities to develop. When you measure the investment that we ask them to manage for us it's a pittance when you look at what we may offer in terms of coaching.
Mr. Sharp and Ms. Stahl.
One of the things that has come up tonight about this 1.4 million, 200,000 of it we thought we were going to get for the city high school. So we're talking about 1.2 million in cuts plus the extra 200,000. But in reality, when we presented this budget to the county commissioners back in the spring, Dr. Jeffrey, correct me if I'm wrong, you said that we were going to have over a $2 million shortfall.
Yes, sir.
And in reality, at the first of this year, fiscal year, we cut almost $1.2 million out of the central office.
Yes, sir.
And you might want to relate to the county commissioners not who they were, but what positions we cut at that central office. Then we found out that we have to cut another $1.4 million. That's the kind of problem that we've had, and I've been on this board, this is going to be my 4th year, and we have consistently communicated to this county commissioners that we cannot continue to have flat funding. It's hurting us every year, and since Dr. Jeffries has been on this board, he has had to use RIF one other time. He cut back our valuable assistant principals from 12-month employment to 10-month employment.
And clerical.
Yeah. We are consistent, and I'll guarantee you, I won't be on the board in January, but I guarantee you next spring, we're going to have to cut even more because dollars are flat, completely flat. And as long as we continue to be funded flat, we're going to have these cuts, and we're going to have to cut people, and it hurts my heart. And one of the reasons why the board decided to table this is that we were going to have to cut guidance, social workers. We only have 10 social workers, and we're going to cut 3 of them. That's 30%. And we're going to have to cut guidance counselors who these children that are fragile desperately need in our school system. And we're going to have to cut a media specialist. And if you guys go back to your Evergreen report that you did before Dr. Jeffries got here, I've looked it over many times. That Evergreen folks who did that report said that we were doing due diligence in what was happening and showed us that we cut 19 counseling positions prior to Dr. Jeffries getting here. We cut over 130 teachers, and part of that was because we were trying to fund technology to put us on a one-to-one situation. But as long as we're being frank, if these two boards can't get together and look at the dollars and how we can utilize those dollars in the best way possible, we're going to continue to be a low-performing school system. And that's going to impact our economic development for both of our counties, Nash and Edgecombe County. When you're in the bottom 5 in the state, people know that. When they move into this community, they look at schools. Young people look at schools first. And we're low-performing. And we don't apologize for that because we're doing everything we can to try to get out of low performance. But we have a difficult time finding teachers, let alone bus drivers.
What is your population this year versus last year? How much is it down?
About 200. About 200.
I think what Mr. Outlaw is alluding to.
Exactly.
But can I answer that question?
Well,
Because
let me tell you where he's going with this. You're using the word flat funding. We've never done flat funding with you since I've been a commissioner.
Okay.
You gotta understand that the statute says, and under the new statute we operate under, we've got to keep our per student funding the same. We've never done that. What we do is give you the same amount each year, and your student population is going down each year. So your per student allotment is going up every year. So don't, yeah, flat funding is not what we do.
let me use
You
bus
follow
drivers.
what I'm saying there?
Let me use buses as an analogy. I don't know what the figure is, but if we have 6,000 students that ride buses every day, and we divide it into the amount of buses, we can pretty much estimate how many buses that the state's going to be able to provide for us to use that transportation. It's the same way with the students. We can lose students, but we can't dictate where we lose them. We lose 3 from one end of the county and 4 over here and 5 over here, and pretty soon you have 200. But we still have the schools open, and we still need those finances to support them. We need the central office folks to support them. So losing students, we're losing dollars, but it's not helping us in terms of what we have to pay for.
Right. And you're getting into the part of what we keep saying is we got to reduce facilities where we can. We can't keep
Right.
reutilize facilities because our population is down. So just keep that in mind when we move over into the capital side.
Right.
Mr. Sharp, did you have something?
No, Madam Chair, I'm going to pass on this with this task.
I think we're good for the moment.
For the moment? Okay.
And I'd just like to say, I enjoy these conversations. We just need to do like we did at Red Oak the other night. Everybody keeps up, and it's gonna be much better when we leave it.
Student team.
Going back to what Commissioner Outlaw was talking about, the mentoring and principals, any options there that you
Can't
can
hear
look
you.
at? Mentoring principals, any options other than what you're doing right now? And I'm not saying do away with what you have, but are you looking at, as you look to balance off your budget, are there any other options that you can look at in that
I
particular
think I
area?
can further speak for the superintendent. The team has did their due diligence in making those recommendations. And if you have any suggestions you can bring to the table, we are more than welcome to receive those recommendations or suggestions.
Well, I would have some principals in the room. When you were a principal, how did you get that expertise? Did you get it from the central office staff, which central office is kind of
They
system-wide?
connected me
How
with-
did you do it then?
They connected me with a seasoned principal, like I was connected to Lloyd Thrall.
So you didn't use mentors, you just connected with a seasoned principal?
Yeah, what about you?
Parallel you with the season.
Okay, so
And another-
you did
As
different.
as a former principal, I had an executive coach. I had folks who were working outside of the district to support my growth, and I was working in challenge schools that were identified for every designation you could think of. So when you make comparisons, I think it's important to make apples to apples comparisons. The ISD didn't exist previously. We have principals who are confronting those challenges today. So let's be realistic when we're talking about the good old days and what that was accurate then, and it was appropriate then. The leadership challenges today are more difficult than we've ever seen in public education. That's a fact.
Okay, well, does the State Board of Education recognize this, and what assistance are they giving?
If you've been paying attention to the developments at North Carolina Department of Instruction, Commissioner, they've made considerable cuts. They've jettisoned a great bit of the professionals who were supporting and developing schools. So that model is still being developed, but we do know they've eliminated a lot of talent.
Mr. Lamb?
I didn't even know these positions existed. Does the state help fund them? Are they all locally funded? And how long has our system had this program of mentors?
We don't have a state-funded mentor program. We contract with veteran principals who have been exceptional in their craft, have transitioned to district office, superintendent leadership. We have 3 that work on a contractually per hour basis. And those 3 support, I think, 7 or 8 principals that are novices.
And how long has that been, that program?
Since my tenure, we've worked to provide executive support to principals and district personnel. We also have contracted with the BB&T Leadership Academy under my tenure, and that's free of charge to the district.
I think discussion is good. I know my board well enough to know where these thoughts are coming from and why they're coming out. What it boils down to, Dr. Jeffries, and board members, is we, like y'all, hear all the time from your employees, but more so from your parents and students. And the things that are being asked by other board members are things that I know I get quizzed on quite a bit from the parents of your students. Sometimes I guess we don't let them know what we're really doing, and I've heard so many times a negative comment about these principal mentors when we got classrooms that do not have a certified teacher in it. They think we're misspending money. To the ones that have problems, is this what you're hearing out there in the workplace? I get, and I'm just guessing, because I know I get it quite a bit. So I don't think are here to question your methods, or shouldn't be, and Ms. Bullock, certainly we have no authority whatsoever. Other than I do think we have a responsibility to let you know what we hear about our school system all along, rather than it just stay with us and you not knowing what we hear. But I would think you're hearing the same thing. I don't know, maybe you're not.
And if I might say something to that, as I said before, we're glad that people are talking, because that's how you grow.
That's right.
And that's how you become better at what you do. I also am a firm believer that when you have questions, you get the best information when you go to the subject matter experts. By that I mean, if I've got a question that pertains to the county and what the county is doing, I would come to you or to one of the other commissioners or somebody in the county office to get the best information that I could get. And with that, all I would ask is that if you, as commissioners, receive questions concerning how the school is operating or what the schools are doing, I think for the best information to be spreaded or to be disseminated would be to get that information from the superintendent or someone in his staff, because they are the experts from that field, whereas you are the experts on the field of financing. Does that make any kind of sense? We all get questions. I get questions. But when I get questions and I'm a member of the board, I still refer those questions to the superintendent's office, because I want to make sure that when that information is assimilated, it is the best and the greatest and the most correct information that can be gathered. And I would ask, if you as commissioners do get questions, that you refer the person to the superintendent's office or call the superintendent and ask his office for information, so we're all saying the same thing, because a lot of times we don't quite get the same message.
Well, we operate somewhat different. We as commissioners, I know how I operate, I think the rest of us do. We like to get answers, we like to respond back to our people directly.
Right, but I'm not saying that, but what I am suggesting is that you get your answer.
And we're also,
From
you understand,
superintendent.
working under protocol, which can be changed, is, I don't call you superintendent. I'm now.
Oh, chair.
I call you chair.
Chair.
If I want something related to the superintendent, the manager related to, so it's not quite as easy as you say, but certainly, as we learn one another, maybe we'll get more open in that regard.
But I think as we're addressing our protocols, now that as we planned for this meeting, Commissioner Davis and I had a meeting together, we talked about the fourth and the things that commissioners wanted and needed to know, and I shared with him some things that we were trying to do on the school board. and I think it has been effective for our meeting tonight, maybe getting some answers to some questions that we didn't have. And for example, classroom teachers do have their mentors, and not having certified at this point, we're having to fill positions as best we can, and we are trying to use qualified, maybe long-term subs, et cetera, because as you said, we do have a shortfall of certified teachers in our classroom because we're just not finding them. They're run across the state or across the line where there are additional salary increases for them, but we are looking at incentives and ways to encourage our teachers in the classrooms to want to stay here. And as you say, back in the day, I went through the principal's executive program. They don't even have that anymore, where they took me out of my school for a week and 2 weeks, and I lived in a dormitory, and that's how I developed my skills, but I don't even think that program exists anymore, so that's how I was trained. So to say that beginning principals don't need any training, I would say that just like we're training our teachers, our administrators need training also, and if we can find those principals who have been in the trenches, for them to come with hands-on and their expertise to work with our people is going to be beneficial for us because they can give directions. I just wish they had that principal's executive program still going, because that was like boot camp. I'd leave home on Sunday afternoons, when I came back it was Friday. But I always had to make sure I had planned for the assistant principal that was going to be left there when I came back, so
We
there are
probably
things in place.
spent enough time on this.
We sure are gonna have to go, cause you guys get your.
I need one more thing. Commissioner Combs, you called me today with a question. I'd like, and I asked you to just bring it up tonight. Would you explain that question you got
Okay.
situated with today, I think? And this is the kind of thing that, I'm gonna let him explain what he ran into today.
I had a person call me today and asked me, told me that we had a hiring freeze on for teachers in Nash County. Is that right, or is that phone talk?
We have a district-wide hiring freeze. As a result of the deliberations from my board with the reduction in force, the component of that, once the board authorizes us, we go back, identify impacted personnel. As a part of board policy, the process is those who are impacted by a reduction in force, we make offers based upon their areas of licensure. So rather than continue to hire and lose those options to staff that are currently serving, we froze until we got to the other side of it, so it's a 2-week freeze. So that is accurate, but it's so that we can administer the reduction in force process if approved in alignment with board policy.
Okay, and the concern there, Dr. Jeffries, was that his daughter's sitting in a high school classroom in math class with no teacher. So my daughter's sitting here getting behind because she just got somebody sitting in there with them, but not a certified teacher trying to teach them anything. They're just there. And she's getting behind all the time. And that's, our concern, your concern, everybody's concern, I realize, should be those students. So if our students don't have availability to teachers, then I think that should be a concern of all, your board, our board, Nash County, everybody. And maybe it's because but we're here, we're operating these schools, but the first thing we should have is teachers in the classroom teaching the teachers, and all this other stuff just falls somewhere down the road.
And just to be clear, that vacancy was created before the freeze. We've had historic challenges with filling math and science vacancies district-wide, particularly at secondary. The freeze has been for 2 weeks. That closes this week. So the essence of your question, teachers are pivotally important to children's development. But of the 2,000 employees that we have, we're recommending to the board a reduction in force of 13 employees, but in order to appropriately administer the process as required by board policy, we've enacted a freeze until we get to the other side.
That brings another question you just popped in my mind. Why are we having a problem hiring teachers?
Wow. How much time do you have?
Where we at? Why do we have that problem?
From my limited perspective, I would imagine that a good bit of it has to do with the devalue messages that educators as a whole send. When you talk about why invest in professional development, why support, why coach, I don't know why anyone decides to come into a profession that is valued so poorly and has such a pivotal impact in the lives of children. But we are also seeing that with the challenges with compensation, and to the legislature's credit, they are making advances. But when you reconcile the level of credentialing, the level of education that it requires, and you should be required to meet before you stand in front of a child, it doesn't match in terms of compensation. So there are a plethora of reasons why I hear from novices in those first 3 years who are jettisoning the profession. Those are people we had who are leaving. And then when you look at the teacher education programs in this state alone, the enrollment is diminishing. So when you have less supply, you're not going to be able to fill the demand.
And that's, to me, that's sad because it's got
It's
to be hurting.
incredibly sad.
You know, that's.
Dr. Jeffries, when you lose a teacher, do you have an exit interview process whereby you sit down and you ask that person something along the lines, why are you leaving our system?
Mr. Miller, you shared it.
We do have that exit interview process. We have electronic process with.
Well, I know about the electronic process,
Yes.
but does anybody, principal, central office, go to an experienced, seasoned teacher and say, hey, you've been here 20 years. Why are you leaving our system?
We have to
Does
give
that
them-
happen?
We have to give them the ability to be anonymous when they complete that information, so we don't want to put them, feel like we're retaliating in any way, so we give them the opportunity to answer that information anonymous.
And it's also shared with us when we see our personnel recommendations. It's an attachment that does not go out with the recommendation. It's an attachment for us to understand why did Susie Brown leave our system? Was it to get another job? Was it to come out of the profession? Was it family illness? It is beside each person's name.
I think what Mr. Outlaw probably leading up to it, and I just know this, I think if you lose 25 teachers this year, if I went to all 25, I've talked to them myself, I dare say over 10% would have anything to do with money. I just hear it all the time.
Well, many of them leave for less money.
That's right. So, and you and I have talked about teacher morale, and we gonna talk some more about that, but that's a big problem we got here. But I think we need to move to
Get
the
going.
next item this time.
Okay, student achievement? Because we need to.
Madam Chair, I am aware that you've shared with the chair of the commissioners our academic focus, so I provided that document to the commissioners this evening. And any questions that they may have, we'll be prepared to answer. I don't know if you want us to do it this evening or if you receive them, but the chief academic officer and I are available to answer any specifics.
I know they've not had time to go through this, but.
The document lays out our common instructional approach, the revisions we've made at kindergarten through third grade, specifically our phonics-based approach in grades K1 and 2, AVID implementation, and the challenges confronted by level and by district, and most importantly, the future of Nash-Rocky Mountain Public Schools instruction. So if you want to give them time to digest it and then receive those questions, we'll be responsive.
My board said to just move on.
We've got time to sit and digest it.
Mr. Outlaw, what is your pleasure?
Well, I'm just saying, I'd rather have the time to sit and look at that and digest it.
You want to take it up in a future
Yeah,
committee meeting?
I think that'd be best.
Okay. Is that okay with everybody on the board?
So you have time to read it and digest it.
I would just say, before we move off that item, I'm just saying to the choir resolve
think as you read through this, this will give you some.
And you provide this to me, and I have studied it, and you asked if we give it out tonight. We have done it, I did not.
Okay.
I haven't shared this prior to tonight, but nobody else has seen it. But, Dr. Jeffrey, what you're saying is, this is an outline of what y'all are doing to hopefully improve these districts.
That is a summarization of the initiatives and efforts of the professionals who serve the students of Nash-Rocky Mountain Public Schools. We make revisions on an ongoing basis, but that's a snapshot of where we are currently.
All right, we will do just that.
Okay.
Chair.
Number 7.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Miller, capital grant application.
Good evening again. As of today, obviously, we are well aware and appreciative we received the $10 million grant. As of today, I spoke with Mr. Nathan Manuar, who is my contact with DPI. He was a part of the selection process. So after I went through and thanked him for approving us for this particular $10 million grant, I asked 2 questions in regards to the grant. How will the disbursement of funds be handled? Basically, what he explained to me is that the school district has to complete a request form that has not been published yet, that he will provide us that information each time we need funds. So whenever funds are requested, we need funds or have been expended or expensed, we have to fill out a request form and submit it to DPI for them to provide us with these funds. There's no lump sum of funds that will transfer to the district at one time. Each time a request is submitted to DPI, we must show the matching funds from local funds that they have been spent as well. So for example, he provided me an idea or example, if the design phase costs $2 million in sake of argument, our request to DPI would be for $1 million, showing the local funds being used for the other $1 million. So all expenses incurred, we must make the request through the process. As of today, only 1/4 of those grant funds have been delivered to DPI, but by the end of the fiscal year, the entire $10 million will be in DPI's account at that time. And all grant funds are allocated to DPI quarterly on a quarterly basis. The other question that was asked, is there a time frame, a time period where we must use these particular funds? He said there is no time constraint on using these particular funds. He said the funds do not expire. Obviously, we don't want to take our time in using the funds, but there's no rush from DPI that we have to use it under a certain particular time frame to expend these $10 million.
If you would inquire, or if you'll give me the contact, I'll inquire. Our concern, of course, will be the 5 years where we forego any lottery funds other than this $10 million. You know, we won't, if they're going to start that this year, yet we're not going to draw down any money, that's going to leave a shortfall in our budget. So if we could find out how that 5-year allocation is programmed to see if it corresponds with drawdowns.
I'll get you his number.
Okay, thank you.
Get
Thank
that to him,
Appreciate
absolutely.
I think, I'm pleased to hear one thing, that it's a match for match as we go. Some of our grants, we got to spend all of our money first before we get any money. That's great that it works that way. The other thing I'll just say, when you say there's no way that they can expire, believe me, there is a way they can expire. It takes one meeting of the General Assembly to expire it, so I don't want to leave here thinking that it won't expire. We have seen them come to us numerous times when we are not spending what we got. Like I say, it takes about one good meeting to look at and send that money back. So I just think you let us get in bad shape physically at the state level again, that money needs to have been spent, quite frankly.
You I did ask that specific question in regards to our time frame. So as long as we're showing that we're moving along in the process, that $10 million will be there for us to draw down against.
As long as things are looking good, yes.
Absolutely.
Well, can I would assume that our finance director is working hand in hand with them as this moves forward?
I'm sure we will. We'll have to.
I hope, yes.
I'm sure those drawdowns probably require 2 signatures,
Probably.
both chairmen.
I'd
May
like-
not, but usually that's how the lottery money, you have to have the signature.
He said it works in conjunction the same way the lottery money does as well.
They did say that, okay.
I'd like to say a special thank you to the commissioners, and especially to Commissioner Davis, who worked very collaborative together to secure this grant, and I'm hoping that we will continue our collaboration as we go about doing our match and spending our monies and working with our finance officers and working with our planning and our timeline as we go along with this. And I also want to take this opportunity to say another thank you to Senator Rick Horner also for being a support for us to help us to get this accomplished. With the two teams working together, we see what is possible. And just tonight, we see what can happen. And I hope that we've all been open with each other and transparent with each other, because there's a lot to learn about running a school, and you see all the rules and regulations, as you said, Commissioner Davis, there are regulations that we have to follow and laws that we have to follow, as we are trying to all do what is best for our students, because they belong to all of us. And again, I thank all of you for your cooperation.
Just for y'all's information, at the next meeting, we will propose a reimbursement resolution. So between the time we draw down the money and the time we borrow the other 10 million, we can be reimbursed for any expenditures y'all have regarding this project. So we don't have to wait until we borrow the money before we start spending the money.
I appreciate, Chairman Ed, your comment about working together moving forward. We haven't done that in quite a while, and it's my hope that in getting the school built, we do know it's y'all's school to get built, but we also know that we can help you quite a bit with some of the expertise on our board. We are convinced we can save you a lot of money. So if you'll just allow us to work, I don't know, I think we need to start thinking about how we're gonna do that. Do we get a school committee, of some of your people, some of our people, do we use the committee we already have? Just be thinking about that, and maybe I'll let the committee be, we can work on that, but as we decide where you put in it, that is indeed y'all's decision. Once you make up that mind where we're gonna put it, if it requires purchase of land, let us help you do all that kind of stuff. Select an architect, I'd love for us to work together to do that, right on through, keeping it on a budget, because it's really, we need to keep it near that $20 million. We know what we've got, capital money to spend, so I'm just looking forward to that. The other thing I feel like we need to do, and this is the question to my manager that I had to ask and the superintendent, you know, we have an additional funding partner in this capital outlay, in Edgecombe County, and since we have this money, I know they know we've got it, because their chairman has asked me about it. I think we need to, in fairly short order, let them know what their obligation is going to be. It's somewhere in the $2 to $3 million obligation on their part, and we just need to let, you know, officially let them know, Dr. Lamb, who does that?
We had a meeting last year, the superintendent, myself, and the county manager.
I just know I would appreciate if it was the other way around, somebody telling Nash County that you going at X point, probably gonna have to spend some funds so they can start getting that separated. And so I think we need to officially notify them of that. We don't know what the dollar amount will be, but we know about what it'll be. Dr. Jefferson
right now, with you posing this question now, I feel at a disadvantage. I haven't had a chance to gauge the board's desires as it relates to that. But I serve at the pleasure of the board, however they want us to do it. I do think it would be prudent for us to incorporate Edgecombe County representation in any meetings moving forward, as they are also a partner in the funding for that. I agree with your sentiment.
Mr. Chairman, I will work with our finance office to make an estimate based on certain assumptions, and contact Edgecombe if that works. Have a meeting, invite the superintendent.
Well, let's do that and invite you to chairman of the board as well. That's what I'd like to do, and we'll do it together.
So just as we presented our budget to them, we probably need to just, as we have this, what we couldn't hear, schedule another meeting with them to share. Just as we- Oh, I was just saying to him, just as we did previously, as we scheduled this meeting, we also had a meeting where we presented our budget to the Edgecombe County Commissioners also. We need to do that.
Okay. That's what we'll work on that, and thank you.
Any additional items?
Any board member have anything else they wish to bring up at this time? The only thing I would have is we did not set our next, committee meeting date. I'd like to go ahead since we've really got something to work on.
I'm gonna have a whole, after November the 6th, I'm gonna have a whole new board of people.
So you want to
I need to wait until I have the new people on the board too.
I'm not sure who you got on that committee. You got some that won't,
All three that are on the committee will be no longer on the committee.
would not be on the committee, I understand.
So I need to wait for that. Mr. Dahl?
I just want to take this opportunity before some of us happen to leave to go to Rose Hill, to thank the county commissioners and our board for this kind of meeting. We desperately need these meetings, and especially, I thought the committee the small committee meetings, we were able to discuss a lot of things and educate ourselves to this process. It's so important moving forward. I know I won't be part of this board, but we'll be having new board members come on board. And I noticed when I read over a lot of they're saying about retention and recruiting teachers as their number one priority. I look back on some of the materials that I had in my campaign, and my counterpart's campaign along with me was our recruitment and retention of teachers. And I noticed recently that Edgecombe County Schools is starting a program similar to the Teacher Fellows Program, where they're going to recruit students to give them a 4-year college to come back and spend 4 years back teaching in Edgecombe County. Those are kind of innovative ideas that we as both boards can talk about in the future, like Mr. Cohn said, and how can we recruit teachers and how can we retain teachers. And those small committee meetings are so important, and I really appreciate our chairpersons getting together and doing this, because I think if you continue that, we'll be on the right direction. So when it comes to budget time, everybody will be on the same page.
Thank you, Mr. Dahl.
Thank you so much.
And teaching is gonna be even harder, because I read somewhere there's already a 400,000 shortage of teachers this year, nationwide.
My son is principal at Hunt High School in Wilson. He told me, Daddy, he needs a math teacher right now. Hadn't had a math teacher since the beginning of the year. He had 2 openings last year, was never able to fill it. I said, have you been calling the colleges? East Carolina, you know what, they had 2 math majors in education. 2 last year. You know, we should have 150 to 200 math majors come out of ECU. And as long as we have RTP out there, and these people that know math and science, and they can make 6 figures out of college, we're going to continue to have trouble finding teachers. And that's a problem.
Issue.
Entertain a motion to adjourn the county commissioners at this time.
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Combs, there a second? Second by Commissioner Wells. Any questions on the motion? All in favor of the motion, let it be be known by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed by a like sign? Commissioner stand adjourned.
The chair will entertain a motion for adjournment.
Second.
Has been moved by Mrs. Bullock to adjourn and seconded by Mr. Dahl, was that you? That we adjourn at this time. All those in favor, make known by the usual sign of aye. Aye. Those opposed? Thank you, everybody. Thank you.